When I look up at the screen behind me and see my name associated with the word artist, I always feel a little self-conscious. These days, everyone calls themselves an artist. In fact, I don't think there's been an occupational description that has been more widely misused or frankly abused, except maybe visionary or whore. And yet, unarguably, an artist is what I am. I paint, I draw, I make photographs and video. And for the past decade, I have made my living from exhibiting and selling this work. It is, in so many ways, a traditional occupation, as old as, maybe even older than, well, being a visionary or a whore. And over several thousand years, the meaning and function of art within society, and with it, the cultural, intellectual, spiritual, and economic relevance of the artist has ebbed and flowed. Right now, no one would dispute the ascendancy of the visual in our culture. Popular interest in art has risen to such an extent that tickets for those public shows starring art's most bankable box office names, Da Vinci, Caravaggio, Picasso, Warhol, are restricted and meted as sparingly as lottery winnings. Despite hard times, auction houses are reporting record prices for the work of contemporary artists. The half a dozen or so best-known living artists in both the USA and UK have annual incomes that exceed the gross revenues of Australia's most successful trade book publishers and record companies. Of course, this ascendancy has paralleled the expansion of the web and the rapid evolution of technology that not only makes the creation and distribution of imagery easier, but through various forms of social media encourages its discovery, collection, and sharing by more people than at any other time in history. It also enables quite small groups of people with an interest in the obscure and arcane to discover and share with each other, giving presence, appreciation, and influence to work that might, in an earlier pre-internet time, have been entirely overlooked. All this is fertile material for discussion at a forum such as this, but it's not why I'm here today. Instead, I want to offer an intensely personal perspective of just one aspect of this visual culture, the murky business that exploits what is loosely defined as fine art. I want to argue for a new sense of freedom, of possibility, for a younger generation of artists with the nerve and, not to put too fine a point on it, the inclination to kick a bunch of old farts in the balls. So let me begin with this simple statement. The art world as we know it is doomed, and it is a good thing. I was one of those fortunate artists who enjoyed some success at a relatively young age. At first, it was entirely down to my own efforts. I mounted my own shows and improvised the marketing of them sufficiently well to paint full-time from what I earned from them. Of course, the whiff of money drew the interest of commercial art dealers, first in Brisbane, then Melbourne and Sydney. And it didn't take long before I found myself being courted like a football player or a one-hit Hollywood starlet, with sly promises of personal attention, fame, money, and even drugs. Well, better drugs than I was taking then. If only I'd sign over all rights to my output, along with 50% of whatever might be earned from it. Some of the things said to me during this period were downright odd. The last thing you want is everyone interested in your work, is what one gallery owner told me, as if ubiquity and accessibility should be anathema to an up-and-coming young artist. Another promised, you'll never have to deal with collectors. I'll take care of everything for you. Such a distraction. How silly and girlish and naive of me to think I might want to develop a closer relationship with the very people who were interested enough in my work to want to fork over hard-earned cash for it. Of course, the only real guarantees anyone gets out of a dealer is one show every second year, maybe a book for which the artist underwrites most of the production costs, and a few positive reviews bought from a tame critic or two for a bottle of claret and a bistro lunch. But for a long time, too long, I bought into it. And whatever qualms I felt, I suppressed, reassuring myself that this is what being a real artist was all about. It left a bad taste in my mouth. Fatefully, my career as an artist began in the same year the first Mozilla web browser found its way onto personal computers. Suddenly, everyone had access to the World Wide Web, and we were all caught up in the evolutionary speed and excitement of this new medium and shape-shifting new social and economic paradigms it inspired. I tried to absorb as much as I could of the real ideas that emerged. It wasn't easy, given the ambient white noise bullshit, tech jargon, and vaporous free thinking that defined the 90s. But I learned that attention is currency. The more you have, the more you can leverage. And I learned that ubiquity, not rarity, defines value. The dealer who told me the last thing you want is everyone interested in your work didn't have a clue. There was also a third idea, a little less well-defined then. It was this: if a truly networked society, culture, or economy was to be successful, access to it and the flow of information across it had to be open and unrestricted. In recent years, I've applied this openness to nearly every aspect of my public life as an artist. The interesting thing about all three of these ideas was that they were not really new in the art world. They were well understood by Andy Warhol and informed by the way he operated in New York's downtown art scene back in the late 1950s and early 60s. Andy might have begun his career within the conventions of the commercial gallery scene, but it didn't take long for him to grow beyond it. By the time he was telling us, with an eerie pre-social media prescience, that we all had a chance to be famous for 15 minutes, he was mass-producing his art, appropriating the universally familiar, from Campbell's soup cans to Elvis movie posters, and removing himself almost completely from the art-making process to focus on commoditizing his own fame through mainstream media rather than parochial art press. Make no mistake, Andy leveraged this attention into revenue, from portrait commissions to product endorsements, as well as increased prices for his diversified output. The respect his art received, and it took a while, was encouraged, no question, by an urbane and skilled dealer, Leo Castelli, but the wider strategies were Andy's alone. When I was first preparing my notes for this talk a few days ago, I thought I might honour the tech heritage of TED by comparing the attitudes of the traditional art world and of artists such as me, who thrive quite independently of it, to the differences between closed and open computing technologies. But there's nothing remotely contemporary about the art business. It depends on an almost medieval feudal confinement and control, not of its own intellectual property, after all, because it has none, but that of its artists, who are its indentured servants, its oppressed serfs. Galleries go out of their way to limit the degree to which their artists not only interact with collectors, but everyone else who might establish some stake in their future, from auction houses to corporate and institutional curators. This control is vital because at its heart, the system is devoid of imagination, innovation, or real value to those from whom it levies egregious tolls. From a gallery's perspective, there's nothing to be gained from transparency, let alone openness. Not long ago, one of Australia's most eminent dealers bellowed at me, "I get to decide who sees art." The sad thing is that a new and younger generation of dealers is just as blinkered. It's as if the internet never happened. It's as if they're clinging to denial while their whole fucking world is torn away from them in radical and irreversible change. A couple of days ago, I read a comment from one in the art newspaper. Obviously, finding new clients is crucial for galleries. You have to go to art fairs, as clients don't live around the block anymore. They're global. Yeah, well, duh. So why not turn on your damn laptop or iPad, pick up your phone, readjust your working hours so you're available to clients in Asia, the Middle East, or Russia. Reach out for thousands, not just a few hundred that might pass your standard of fare. In 2006, a year after I left the two highly respected galleries that represented me in Sydney and Melbourne, I decided to break away completely from the commercial gallery system. I decided to use the web to promote my art and develop a direct relationship with those who were interested in it. Later, I learned to use technology to manage every aspect of my art-related business, from communicating regularly with collectors and effecting transactions with them, to managing my archives and even my art supplies. I was the first artist in this country, one of the first anywhere, to walk away from what others saw as compelling opportunities within the traditional art world, and to assume responsibility for my career myself. For the first time in nearly a decade, I felt I could breathe again. The effect on my reputation and earnings was almost immediate. My income rose from around 30,000 Australian dollars in a good year to more than $300,000. My website traffic increased by several thousand a week and generated enough of a buzz that it provoked the curiosity of mainstream media. I ended up in a double-page spread in Vogue. These days, nearly 9,500 individuals subscribe to my monthly email newsletter, while more than 4,500 follow my Twitter feeds and 2,500 have connected with me on Facebook. And although I haven't exhibited in a gallery or an art fair for nearly 3 years now, the Australian Art Auction Record lists me among the top 50 traded artists by value across Australian and New Zealand auctions this year. I'm one of very few women and one of very few artists under 35 to be included. For the past 3 years, every one of my works is sold long before it's completed. And from a collector base of no more than a dozen, all of them located in Melbourne or Sydney, and corralled by the dealers who used to represent my work, buyers of my work now number in the hundreds, spread across a dozen countries. I have not sought to confine my work in any way. Ubiquity, not rarity, is value. Attention is currency. I release my work into the public space under a flexible Creative Commons license, and providing you don't alter the work or try to claim it as your own, and you ask my permission to use it for a commercial or promotional purpose, then you can reproduce it anywhere and in any way you want. As a result, my work is widely distributed and recognised, and this adds value to my new works and whatever else I do as an artist. Of course, even now, few dealers, curators, critics, and even artists really get it. A couple of years ago, I turned down an offer of the most stifling kind of representation from a well-known art dealer. I wrote about our meeting in my blog, a word the dealer had never heard before. He told me without embarrassment that he couldn't figure out what my blood had to do with anything. The next day, I received an SMS from him with just one word. Thanks to the LA-based sculptor David Buckingham, we were able to bring that word to you today. Yeah, he called me a wanker. So professional, Howie. In the end, what provoked this puerile response was loss of control. The dealer wasn't mad because I had written about him unkindly. I hadn't. He was mad that I had written anything at all. Time was, not so long ago, artists had to be wary of crossing swords with art dealers, even those with modest reputations. But the art world post-web is different. The world as they know it is coming to an end, and they haven't a clue about how or why it is happening. Of course, I don't fear these pompous, impotent, late middle-aged anachronisms. I suppose I've become more fearless as I've gained confidence in my own independence. I have few qualms about exposing every aspect of my creative and personal life. For 4 years, I maintained a candid and at times discomfortingly intimate blog. And when I discontinued it at the beginning of this year, I took to documenting every aspect of my creative and personal life in photographs with the same degree of unabashed openness. You can see how I create my large enamel paintings, and you can see me fuck. I don't care. As an artist, I see this as a logical extension of my commitment to the openness of the web. I'm not just exposing myself physically. I'm inserting myself directly and visibly into the ideas I'm interrogating in my art in order to understand them and help my collectors and audience understand them more directly. I'm also creating a narrative derived from real rather than imagined experience. And if the responses I get are anything to go by, the narrative is important to people's personal engagement with the art. As I've said, nothing is hidden, even if at times it provides grist for the gossip mill of the old school art world, because it conveys a sense of reality, of truth, of flawed humanness that encourages a more direct relationship with my work. Which brings me to one more of the ideas that were first mooted in the 90s, one that I see as increasingly operative in all of the arts, the gradual but inexorable shift in the locus of value from the individual creative product, the artwork, the book, the musical composition or performance, to the producer. In other words, whether we like it or not, the public perception of the individual, the persona they concoct for us, is worth more than any individual work they create. We all understand these days that awareness is a form of currency, but the art world still clings to the idea that it is the artwork that is the most powerful attractor of that awareness. This encourages critics and curators to continue to argue for their role as the ultimate arbiters of what most deserves our attention, what can be called great art. But in what is now a deeply networked, deeply informed culture, the resources are everywhere to enable us to decide for ourselves. Increasingly impotent, the arbiters wail about the death of a higher culture, but in the end, what they're really mourning is their loss of power. They envy bitterly the artist's reclamation of a respect that owes nothing to their improval or imprimatur. Fortunately, the visual artist is probably better positioned to exploit this than others such as writers, composers, and performers who rely on the eroded protection of copyright and the collection of royalties and license fees to make a living. But over time, I suspect we can test a new range of possibilities and come up with innovations and initiatives that might illuminate a different path. And who knows, maybe we might at last remove the intermediary, the middleman, from between the artist and the audience, and begin to work out directly, collaboratively, just how each might get what they want and need from the encounter. Thank you for listening.